The Belonger, a novel, written by Mary Kathleen Mehuron, and narrated by Kathleen Hewitt. Chapter 13. Holly had her hands on her hips when her phone chimed. It was Montez. "Yes?" Holly answered. "Hello, Holly," he said. "I'm calling to find out where you are riding out the storm." She glared at her son. "I'm staying right here with Byron, of course. Where else would I be?" She stepped away so Byron couldn't hear the words they were about to have. "Are you sure that's a good idea? He's going to have enough to deal with without having to worry about you too. The old folks are saying Grand Turk will get the worst of it. You would be safer on Queen's Quay." She was outraged to think Montez knew all about Byron's plan to send her away, and that he would ask her to abandon her entire world based on the hearsay of folk tales. They don't know where Hurricane Nestor will land, or even if it will make landfall. She snapped. It seemed everyone, including Anthony, had been talking behind Holly's back, and she didn't like it. "Let's not take any chances, Holly. Get off island with Anthony and go to his house. I'd consider spending the storm together, but I've got my parents and my girl friend." Holly clenched her teeth. She wasn't going to make this easy for him. "Your what?" "Okay, I understand you're surprised. I should tell you she's not just a girlfriend. I'm afraid I've fallen in love with Samira. You know I've always had a thing for her. It looks like I finally won her over." Although Holly continued to listen, she did so bending over, with the back of one hand held up to her mouth. She felt like the world was spinning. "Why haven't you told me this before now? This is a small town. You've made me look like a complete idiot. In front of my employee, too." Not only was she the last person to know he was serious about another woman, that woman was her head chef. Montez sounded contrite. "Yes, I would have told you, but she and I haven't been dating long. Nestor has forced my hand, I'm afraid. I want her with me so I can keep her safe. I'm sorry, Holly. You've never lived through a big hurricane before. I'm sure you don't realize it would be awkward for her to have you in such close quarters, possibly for days on end." "Even though the quarters that you mention are mine?" He cleared his throat. "It's Byron's home too, and he is my son as well. The money he used to buy his half of the business was from a trust fund I started for him. I feel I do have some rights. Anthony is proud to take care of you over on Queen's Quay." So everyone, including Anthony, had been talking behind her back. She didn't like that one bit. Her face flushed into what she knew were ruddy patches. "I have 2 hands, Montez. I can take care of myself." In her embarrassed state, she couldn't stop herself from adding, "like I always have." With that, she hung up. Years earlier, when Holly had announced to Montez that she was pregnant, he'd told her he was overcome with shame. There couldn't have been a worse thing for him to say. "I was lonely and far from home," he said then. "That isn't an excuse, but I see I've made a terrible mistake. Now, you will pay the price for it." Fuming, she went back to her doctors and asked how it was even possible. She had done everything they'd told her to prevent pregnancy. She was committed to getting a bachelor's and then a master's degree, and she had to work full-time while she did it. How could she become a mother while trying to do all that? In the end, she was left with an overwhelming decision. Would she carry this baby to term or not? When Montez finally brought himself to confess to Holly that he wouldn't marry her, she pointed out, "We have bigger fish to fry than whether you love me or not." It popped out in anger, as the most blatant truths of her life often did. It hadn't been easy, but Byron had turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to her. Holly was torn away from her memories when she heard the sing-song ring of Byron's phone go off. He never really uttered a word. Instead, he kept repeating, "Uh-huh," until he said a final, "Bye," and pressed his red button. She watched him closely, worried about how worried he looked. He took a deep breath before he turned from his phone toward her. "Mom, we insist. It will all be over in a few days. It could even be fun for you, a nice change of scenery." He lifted his eyebrows in a look that was both hopeful and questioning. As charming as Byron was being, Holly had no intention of caving on this issue. She pulled her shoulders back and crossed her arms, and, quite unexpectedly, a strange yet all too familiar sensation came over her, and she lost her balance. It was as if the entire planet had tilted. The line of the horizon was now vertical, and her field of vision was covered with flashing lights. She grabbed onto the back of a chair as the room spun faster. Oh no! And she was hit by a wave of vertigo that dropped her to her knees. She bent herself in half and put her cheek down on the cool cement floor. Anthony sprinted toward her. "What on earth?" "Sometimes when she's really upset, she gets dizzy," Byron explained. From the floor, Holly watched Anthony lean down toward her. His mouth moved, but she couldn't understand a thing he was saying to her. Strangely, the only things registering in her brain were the questions he was posing to Byron, and Byron's responses. "How long does this last?" Anthony asked with great concern. "She looks like death warmed over." Byron leaned over her too. "It doesn't happen often, but it can be on and off for a day or two." Holly lifted herself up onto all fours, willing herself to hold in the contents of her stomach. After a moment, Byron handed her a bottle of water. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." She swept away a couple of tears. Anthony stood in front of her head, gesticulating wildly. "Byron, how do we help this poor girl?" Her son got down and spoke softly into her ear. "Can we move you? Can you make it to the house?" Holly nodded, though she had no idea how steady she would be on 2 feet. To Anthony, Byron said, "She has to have calm and rest if it's going to pass." Byron took one of her arms and began to help her up, but before Holly could find her balance, Anthony swooped her up in his arms. Byron seemed to respect the efficiency of the move. Without a word, he motioned for Anthony to follow him to the inn. The three of them made their way across the narrow, dusty road, through the wooden gates, and through the tall double-entry doors, which were flung wide open. Once in the foyer, Anthony followed Byron along the hallway that led to Holly's small apartment. She was mortified by all the fuss, yet she couldn't deny she was still feeling pretty helpless. As Anthony laid her down gently on her bed, Byron opened her closet and took a look inside. "Mom, where's your suitcase?" The weakness had overcome Holly to the point where she could barely speak. She had been sick like this many times before, and each time it was disabling for a while. She didn't have the strength to fight Byron any longer. She motioned Anthony closer. "My physical therapist says that being in the water can help vertigo," she whispered. "She was always trying to get me to join a gym with a pool. Do you think it's true?" He looked surprised. "I do. In my experience, it definitely helps seasickness. The coolness of the water, and something else to focus on besides the nausea." "Will you take me out? I don't want to just lie here and have it roll over me again and again. I'll be happy to try anything." Anthony put his hands on his hips and looked down at the floor in front of him. When he spoke, it was with certainty. "I'll handle this, Byron. I know you have a lot to do before the storm hits." Byron didn't stop moving as he scurried around the room collecting things for his mother to bring with her. "I can't thank you enough." As Anthony stuffed the items into a bag, he said, "You better get to the Do-It Center soon, or all the plywood will be gone. I'm going to load your mum on the boat and head out immediately. You two best say your goodbyes now." In addition to being nauseous, Holly suddenly felt horrified. "Byron," she said through a sob, "what if I don't see you again?" He looked at her like she was crazy. Her son, at his tender age, still felt the misguided omnipotence of youth. "Mom, for heaven's sake, nobody's going to die." He sat on the edge of the bed near her knees and took her hands in his. "We'll both be fine. Just head across the passage to Anthony's house and get some rest. I'll see you in a couple of days." She reached up for his face. "Honey." She was not going to the other island. She was going to take a good long swim, and when she felt better, she would come home. But he didn't need to know that right now. Her mattress was old and soft, and she was sunk down into the middle of the bed. Byron leaned over to embrace her. If he's hugging me, he must really be concerned. Pull it together, Holly Ann Walker. Don't be such a baby. Samira appeared at the bedroom window, pressing her face against the screen. She made a monster roar, and then laughed. Holly barely reacted to her little performance. This seemed to irritate Samira so much that she hissed at them all before saying, "A hurricane is coming. Get your ass in gear, Holly." She can't wait to be alone with Montez. Byron gave Samira a malevolent look. "You just go on and mind your own business. I'll take care of my mother." He gazed down at Holly with an expression so sweet that even in her distress she couldn't help but smile back at him. "Anthony's got a stash of food, probably rum too if I know him at all," Byron said quietly. "His house will be quieter for you. One more hug, and then I've got to run. There's a lot to do." He leaned down again, and she held him close for a long, long time. When she finally let him go, he patted her shoulder and then turned to Anthony. Glancing at the window, Holly was relieved to see that Samira was gone. "Thank you again for your generous offer to take care of my mom," Byron said, clasping Anthony's hand in a firm shake. "I'll see you soon." Anthony pulled Byron in for a brief hug, which only alarmed Holly further. She knew full well that Anthony was the only one of the three of them who had survived a massive storm before. It was obvious he saw the situation as grave, and she noticed he wasn't promising they would all see each other again in a couple of days. Anthony stoically clapped both of Byron's shoulders. When he let go, he cleared his throat several times and wouldn't look Byron or Holly in the eye. Holly had heard many stories about the hurricanes that had passed through Turks and Caicos. Many lives had been lost here, and none of those storms had intensified to the level of a Category 5, like Hurricane Nestor. God help us all. Chapter 14. Holly must have briefly fallen asleep, because the next thing she heard was Anthony's voice saying, "Here, suck on these ginger lozenges. They work great for nausea. Even though the water is shallow and fairly calm, it may still feel a bit choppy when we get out there, especially if you already feel sick to your stomach. Maybe the ginger can settle it down before we reach the reef." The gentleness of his tone was soothing. "Thank you." "You are very welcome, my dear." Holly sat up slowly and scanned the room for her bag. "Did you take my knapsack outside already?" "It's safely aboard. I'm sorry to rush you, but do you think you can walk now?" She nodded. "I can make it that far." Gripping the headboard for support, she stood up slowly, testing herself. "Good. We should go." Anthony studied her with a doleful look on his face. "Where did Samira get off to?" "I didn't ask her," he said. "Given the recent news, I assume to find Montez." As hard as Samira had chased Anthony in the past, Holly found it interesting that he didn't seem to care one whit about her, and even more surprising that Samira had apparently changed from desiring Anthony to desiring Montez in a heartbeat. "Did you know about her and Montez?" she demanded. He nodded, though it was clear he took no pleasure in it. "Why didn't you tell me? I thought we were friends." "I didn't think it my place. And to be honest, I knew you would be upset. At my very core, I'm a coward. Hate confrontation. I suppose I worried you might kill the messenger." Holly stood and massaged her temples hard, as if holding on to the sides of her head would help her keep her balance. Anthony's arm around her was surprisingly secure, and she moved easily with him. Once they started walking, she clasped onto his shirt with one hand. Her body was so tense she took in a deep breath and exhaled slowly to try to mitigate the feeling she was hanging on for dear life. He must have felt the extent of her panic, because he asked in a coy voice, "Do you know what my t-shirt is made of, Holly?" She knew he was trying to distract her, but the oddity of his question amused her, so she played along. She scrunched up her face at him and guessed, cotton? No, beautiful girl. Boyfriend material. She let out a long laugh that nearly knocked her over. Anthony stopped walking and held on to her patiently. Through a stifled chortle, she said, "This is not a time to flirt." "Nonsense, it's always the time for that." He gave her shoulder a squeeze as he led her down the beach. If this hurricane doesn't get the best of me, this man just might. Squinting against the bright sunlight reflecting off the white sand, Holly saw a tandem sea kayak at the shoreline. Handling her like she was made of fragile glass, which made her feel slightly foolish, Anthony steered her in the little boat's direction. After he helped her into the front cockpit of the kayak, he gave her a life vest. She pushed it away. "It's too hot. I'm going to suffocate if I strap it on." "Put it in your lap, then, just in case," he said. "We don't know how dizzy you'll get when you're sitting on top of the waves and getting tossed around." Snorkeling had better turn out to be a real cure. It's more trouble than I thought it would be. She took the vest from him, and he pushed the rig off the beach. It made a raspy, scraping sound as it slid into the water. Just past the breaking surf, the shelter of the enormous coral wall surrounding the island kept the surface relatively calm, but they had to get past the crests first. Holly watched as Anthony waded in thigh-high, pushing her and the kayak ahead of him. He got batted around by the currents, but he had the strength to keep his balance. At one point, she saw him tilt precariously far to one side, threatening to topple over, but with a great push, he managed to break through the crests and keep himself upright. It looked like Anthony was still touching bottom, though he was now in chest-high water. He jumped and pulled himself up on his belly over his cockpit. After a few moments of recovery time, he got himself all the way on the kayak and into a sitting position, though the route there was neither elegant nor very athletic. She was just happy he managed it without capsizing both of them. They were sitting on top of the swells now, and with a few powerful strokes of his paddle, he easily got them the rest of the way to his boat, the Angelfish. Anthony used one hand to keep the kayak steady, and one hand to help Holly along as she scrambled up the ladder. Once she was on the deck, she sat on a padded bench, gasping for breath, and watched as Anthony hauled up the kayak. "I am useless. He's doing all the work. The least I can do is make conversation. Are we going to Little Barrier Cay? Seeing it again will be one good thing about this mess we're in." "It's the closest place to go," he said, nodding. "If you don't have some wildlife to study while you're swimming, I don't think my remedy is going to work very well." He used a towel to dry his hands and face, and then left her for a moment to go to the front of the boat. Her heart raced as she clutched the ginger candies and prepared for the worst. Although the trip was relatively short, she knew things could get rough once the boat crossed over the Great Wall. She felt exposed up on deck, but she knew lying down below would be a mistake, as it would make her feel the rocking of the waves more intensely. Not to mention, she would also be breathing the exhaust from the engine down below. For now, she would stick it out here on the bench. The movement of the waves lulled her and made her eyelids heavy. She was spent, and she longed to rest, but she fought against it. The bright sunlight caused intense pain behind her eyes. She could reach the railing of the boat from where she sat, and she clenched onto it as her stomach roiled. "Hold yourself together." Over and over again in her mind, she recited, "Just 10 more minutes. Just 10 more minutes. Just 10 more minutes." Monumental fortitude got her across the shallowest part of the water, but it turned out the grit she had summoned was futile. As the engine revved up and they moved farther away from the shoreline, gasoline fumes rose up and overpowered her. In the end, she couldn't fight the spasms that took hold of her gut. She stood and threw up violently over the side of the boat as she held on for dear life. She was mortified to discover that in the process of getting sick, she'd also wet her pants. Talk about adding insult to injury. I would say this day couldn't get any worse, but I don't want to tempt the universe. Holly turned and saw Anthony studying her from the helm. As another wretch threatened, she bent far over the side of the boat once again. The sound of the engine changed. Anthony was slowing down. He probably thinks I'll pitch myself overboard. She raised her head in time to see a small, sandy, and very much deserted island come into view straight ahead of the boat. It was lovely. The water around it was a much lighter turquoise than the deeper ocean, making it possible to see the coral reef that encircled it. Anthony was heading right toward it. A man, Anthony's buddy Matthias, someone Holly had met before, appeared on deck. Anthony handed over the wheel to him and came down to join Holly. "Point of fact, I couldn't picture myself alone trying to take care of a woman in distress," Anthony said, gesturing toward his friend. Despite her temporary ill health, Holly had never thought herself as being defenseless. She fully intended to give Anthony a piece of her mind, when she felt well enough to do so. For now, she just offered him a half-hearted shrug. "Matthias serves as my first mate when I run fishing and whale-watching expeditions," Anthony explained. "He'll watch the boat while we swim." Holly knew many accused Anthony of only working when he felt like it. It was an inside joke among the locals. She had some idea about the price of excursions he ran, since she had her own dive shop. Even though he's working part-time, he's still doing pretty well. His tourist jaunts easily keep him in spending money for his nights out. She smiled. And cash for me to win on poker night. They reached the coral shelf surrounding the little island, and Matthias hurried to unfold a small anchor, which he tossed away from the boat and into the green-blue water with a great splash. Once the anchor was secure, Anthony brought a beaming Matthias over to Holly. "Matthias knows the sea as well as anyone. Better than I do, in fact." Matthias was a virtual ray of sunshine. She guessed his demeanor had a tempering effect on the melancholy Anthony sometimes seemed to endure. And it was fun to watch how much Anthony enjoyed the opportunity to talk with Matthias in Creole, Spanish, or French, depending on their mood, she supposed. Handy way for them to communicate if they don't want me to know what they're talking about, too, she thought wryly. She caught them in the act when Matthias asked Anthony in French, "Est-elle une hystérique?" "No, she is not in any way hysterical," Holly said. "Je te comprends." Though Anthony gave her a guilty look, he abruptly switched back from French to Creole for a few more words with Matthias before ducking downstairs into the cabin. When he reappeared only seconds later, he had 2 masks and 2 sets of fins. "Let's hope this works," he said. "Yes," Holly said. "There's so much work to be done. I hate being the little woman who swoons." Though the sky was a brilliant blue, the ocean swells were higher than Holly remembered from the last time she'd been out that way. She could taste the tang of salt on her tongue and smell it in the air. She had tried to secure her hair back in a rubber band, but the wind kept pulling tendrils loose and whipping them into her eyes. Still supporting her weight against the side of the boat with both hands, she was hit by another wave of nausea. It seemed as if her knees might buckle at any minute. She bent over the side with her eyes closed, praying for mercy. When she opened them, she fixedly stared down at the water until she sensed Anthony standing next to her. He leaned close and whispered in her ear, "Let's try it. I've brought hundreds of people out on fishing trips, and some always get sick. The surface of the water is kicking up already, but it should still be an easy swim in this shallow water." "You think so?" Holly was hopeful, though her pulse picked up and her shoulders sagged at the thought of swimming in her condition. "We'll start slowly," Anthony assured her. "I'll be right there with you. At the least, you'll feel cleaner once you swim." He handed her the mask and fins. A small stain marked the crotch of the shorts she wore over her bathing suit. She was mortified that he knew she'd peed a bit when she threw up. She was grateful he didn't say more. She went toward the ladder, slipped off her shorts, and threw them in the water. Without a moment's hesitation, she jumped in after them. Anthony followed her with a splash. As Holly lowered her mask and put her face in the water, she smiled. This is like a scene out of the most beautiful travel show you could ever imagine. That or an expensive aquarium that's blown up to be larger than life. It's almost unreal. Corals of various colors formed natural statues, and rays of light filtered through the water in ever-changing patterns. As they drifted along in the turquoise current, 3 spotted eagle rays swam below them, close to the ocean floor. Anthony took Holly's hand and pointed to the rays. He had a huge hand, like a teddy bear's paw. His touch created a surprisingly warm sensation inside of her. When Holly woke up every morning in her new life on Grand Turk, she felt fabulous, cozy, calm, free of aches or pains. And she realized with a thrill that she felt that way now. She could have held Anthony's hand and floated with the current forever. When he reached out and patted her on the cheek, she wondered if he felt the same way. The rays moved as if they were flying. They resembled the eagles Molly had seen at home in Vermont. If an eagle had an extraordinarily long tail and a face like a stunted dolphin. One of them settled down in the sand with its entire body curved and cupped into the ground. Bulbous eyes protruded out of the top of its round, snouted head. It looked like an adorable alien sitting there, maybe a creature from Mars. It's just extraordinary. Though Holly knew the rays had several venomous stingers they could use when threatened, she'd also been told they were quite shy by nature. She was more than content to float quietly above them, near the top of the water, and observe their behavior. The shifting beams of light were a mere backdrop to the animal's majesty. Turning her head for the best angle, the gentle swaying of sea fans and the hues and shapes of the coral lifted her heart. In fact, as time seemed to pass slowly below her, she filled with happiness. She'd been horribly ill just moments ago. Now she wondered, have I ever been more content? It took some minutes before reality invaded, and she remembered this was not a travel show or even a vacation. It was an outing designed to prepare her for an impending and dangerous storm. All of Turks and Caicos was bracing itself for the possibility of a state of emergency. They should be moving on as soon as possible. She lifted her head from the water and signaled to Anthony. When he swam toward her, they pulled their masks up to rest on their foreheads so they could talk. Holly calmly treaded water. "You were right," she said, nearly breathless but in a good way. "I feel much better than I did before." "Happy to hear it," he said, with a smile so bright it rivaled the sun overhead. It was a grin that faded as he looked up and searched the sky. Holly wondered if the weight of their predicament, with all its peril, had been suddenly thrust upon him too. He had a resigned look on his face. He spoke so quietly Holly had to swim closer to hear him. All she caught was, "We'd best go back then." "Thanks for the offer to go to Queen's Cay, but I'm going back to Roseate House," she said. "There's just no point. I won't leave Byron, or the Roseate, to be honest." She clenched her jaw. He put a hand across his face and briefly began massaging it. His eyes were closed. "Obviously, I can't argue with you. You know your own mind. I've been weighing the options myself. My childhood nanny is still alive and on Grand Turk. I will want to check in with her when the storm passes. My house is already closed up because I've been over here for a few weeks. Mateus has family here, but I'm not as fortunate. Might I stay at Roseate as well?" You will find I'm a handy guy to have around. Handier than you might have imagined, given all the hurricanes I have lived through. It's the least I can do. And the truth was, the idea of Anthony hunkering down with them sounded perfect to her. She had her own apartment where she could separate herself from the group when she chose to, and when they were gathered together, Anthony could serve as a buffer between her and Montez. Friend to both. Great comic relief. That would be fine, Holly said. With a nod, feeling confident, she repositioned her mask and took off toward the boat. Chapter 15. The swim worked miracles. Holly felt completely restored to her usual self. How had she not known about this quick cure before? It could have saved her many hours of suffering. Of course, Vermont was landlocked. No turquoise ocean to jump into up there. Thank you, Lord. She was going to need her strength to get through the next couple of days. But she could do it. She was suddenly sure of that. After scrambling back on board, Anthony said, I've got to go take the boat inland, through the passage into North Creek. I'll take you ashore and you can rest, Holly. I'd rather come with you. I feel fine now. Better than fine. It had been a long time since she'd seen the interior of the island. She was always so busy, and she hoped she'd run into Byron, who was no doubt bringing the halcyon into the creek right now as well. She felt the opposite of helpless now. Instead, she was renewed, and interested in a bit of adventure, too. I bet after we tie the boat up, we can catch a ride home from North Creek. But what if we have to walk back? It's a bit of a trek, truth be known. Are you sure you're up to it? He stared into her eyes with what she read as genuine concern. The intensity did not surprise her at this point, but it was still a tad unnerving. She nodded. It's amazing, really. If I ever get vertigo again, I'm going to tell Byron to hand me a mask and snorkel and throw me in the ocean. Ha! Happy to be of service. He gave her a short bow. As you wish, then. We'll drop Mateus off on shore and head to North Creek. Belying its name, North Creek wasn't a running stream, but a 340-acre lagoon with a fairly narrow opening from the sea. At the southernmost end was a narrow channel whose shores were scattered with docks, posts, and platforms. Holly counted 7 other much smaller boats already tied up. She wasn't sure why this area counted as shelter. Are they really safe in here? Anthony shrugged. Historically, it's worked well for most middling storms, but there's no guarantee against hurricane destruction. But it's all we have, isn't it? And certainly the best we can do against Hurricane Nestor. The boats are valuable, sure. But Holly, only a few thousand people live here on Grand Turk. If I lose the angel fish in the next few days, it will be inconvenient for me, absolutely. But if we lose a life, it will hit many people. Hard. He cocked his head. By the way, that rumor we heard about undocumented workers not being allowed in the shelters? Just that, a rumor. One thing we can stop worrying about. He secured his boat between 4 posts that were cut from old telephone poles and embedded into the bottom of North Creek. When he finished tying the ropes off at each corner, he jumped, tucked in a cannonball position, into the water closest to shore, with a loud splash. 3 different varieties of pelicans scattered in surprise. The reddish and great egrets expressed their concern as they stretched their long legs and necks to warn him with their full height. Especially annoyed seemed a small flock of flamingos who displayed the width of their wingspan at him. The terns that were present filled the air with a screeching, "Ah-hee!" Standing in the water, Anthony motioned for her to climb down the back ladder. Just watch for jellyfish, they sometimes make it up this far. Holly made her way down quickly, but it was with some difficulty that they both waded through the chest-high water toward land. Holly watched vigilantly for jellyfish as they trudged along. I got stung once, she told Anthony. Afterward, I did some research on jellyfish. Did you know they have thousands of stinging cells in their tentacles? Anthony made a wincing face as he laughed. Oh, yes. They have laid me low before. Such intense pain. And the blistering, ouch. Did you get that striped pattern on your skin? Holly listed to one side just then, and he reached out and grabbed her hand. Once he got her righted, they plowed ahead. No, she said. It wasn't that bad. Maybe we should stop talking about it. It's freaking me out, just a little bit. He let go of her hand and reached out and gently pinched her on the back. She jumped and let out a tiny scream, but when he laughed, she did too. They both grunted from their exertion as they neared the bank, groaned as well. We're in the clear, Anthony declared in a relieved voice. Not to worry, we're almost there. The stripes I was asking you about, I got them once. They're actually punctures. The rash they caused made me weak for days. Fever and muscle spasms like I will never forget. It was miserable. A wasp started flying around his head. Ducking, he shouted, I'm allergic to the damn things. Many people assume you are hard as nails, Holly said, laughing. But it seems Lord Anthony Bascombe is extremely sensitive to anything with a little venom. He laughed out loud. Including Homo sapiens females. Don't you forget it. Women don't cause raised red welts. Not most of them, anyway. But the way I feel when they are done with me is far worse. Holly giggled. They reached the bank, and she let out a whoop of joy. As if they'd choreographed things ahead of time, Anthony wrapped both hands around her waist, and she jumped as hard as she could at the same time. He pushed her up. She made it onto the high sand and scrambled to her feet. Let me help you now, she said, offering him her hand. He shook his head. I'm not taking us both down. As he climbed up the slick surface of the bank, Anthony's foot slipped, and he crashed down face first. Jesus, he cursed softly under his breath. I am old, fat, and completely out of shape. His biceps are rock solid, though, Holly thought. He's still a powerful man. Once he made it up on the bank, he shook his head and looked at his feet. Walking home in these wet water shoes is going to give us blisters on the bottom of our feet. I forgot about that. I shouldn't have let you come. Holly didn't argue with him, but she didn't say anything either. She had not gotten the encounter with Byron she had hoped for here in North Creek. When she finally got to announce to her child that she was staying put, she would be drenched in sweat. The two wound their way around a narrow sand path through a buttonwood grove, which on a cooler day might have seemed quite lovely. The rapidly soaring humidity made her feel irritable as she slogged along after Anthony, one foot in front of the other. They flagged down an elderly couple in a golf cart and hitched a ride on the bench seat in the back. They were about halfway home when the couple said they were turning in the opposite way of the roseate. After another 30 seemingly endless minutes walking in the baking sun, Holly's old mansion stood before them in the distance.